So we're all good.
Yeah.
All happy with our hot beverages.
Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very good hot beverage. Very good.
Great. So you are listening to In Conversation with myself, Colin, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Gavin Kelly.
How you doing?
And Greg Mulhall.
How you doing?
Coming to you from a new location, the Shinoan Square Residences, Block A5.
Apartment
33, the sitting room.
Sitting room, yeah.
On the couches. A pretty relaxed atmosphere. We have a candle lighting and everything.
We've all got coffee and tea.
And coffee in front of us. And
We also have a guest.
We also have a guest. It wasn't a planned venue, but thankfully our guest was obliging in joining us
As
here.
was our friends to give us their apartments.
Yeah, because we don't actually technically live here.
I think that's terrible in that when we came in, the people who actually live here, you kicked
We
them
kicked
out.
them out.
You said, you guys have stuff to do, don't you? Good luck.
We you can look at it in the way that we're actually forcing them to be more studious because now they have to go to college.
Yeah, exactly. And the voice you just heard is the lovely Rick O'Shea.
Oh yeah, how's it going?
Rick, thanks very much for joining us.
I had no choice when you doorstepped me down in Waterford. I think let's tell this story before we go any further.
Let's go ahead.
I was the curator this year and last year for the Waterford Writers' Weekend, and you were working for the book centre selling books down there. And at one stage at one of the events, you just went, "How are you?" And we were chatting, and you said, "Listen, by the way, I'm a student at DCU and I have a podcast. Will you be a guest?" And I went, "Yeah, sure." And that was
it. Very simple. I mean, I would have gotten around to you anyways, to be honest with you, Rick, if I hadn't met you.
Eventually.
You've had loads of guests on this now. I wasn't really very high on your list of priorities. I was just in front of you.
Well, similar to your story of being doorstopped by Colin, we went to Galway last weekend with a society trip, and we went to a screening of Metal Heart, which is a new Irish film directed by Hugh O'Connor. So there was a Q&A afterwards. Hugh O'Connor was there. Colin stood up in the middle of it and said, "Hi, I'm Colin, will you be on my podcast, please?"
And that's actually false. What happened was, we were sitting at the back of the room, and the Q&A started, and I had asked the question already about the soundtrack, and Greg turned to me and said, "Go on, ask him, will he be on? Everybody will get a laugh out of it," because people take the piss out of me for asking basically anybody. Mm-hmm. Well, not anybody, but people who know.
That's the end of this podcast, right?
Basically, ask anytime I get the opportunity to talk to somebody within the Irish media field or abroad, would they be on the podcast? So Greg kind of was like, "Let's play this up. Go on, say it." And I was like, "No, I don't want to do it." But eventually, he convinced me, and I put up the hand. And I was like, "I think everybody knows what I'm about to ask here." Mm-hmm. But I have a podcast up in DCU, and then everybody groaned. Everybody let out a massive groan. Mm-hmm. And then Hugh actually very cleverly just went, "No."
Yeah.
Everybody got a laugh out of that, and of course afterwards he just went, "Yeah."
There's only one thing worse than that in a Q&A, and that's somebody who says, "I don't really have a question, it's more a long rambling point." We won't name names. There was a couple of those, but we won't name names. But I did ambush. Hugh seemed lovely. Hugh, if you ever hear that, Hugh, I've seen Hugh on stage loads of times, and I knew he was a photographer, and I kind of knew he had a movie. It
was his first film, first directed film.
So I will definitely watch anything he's involved in. His photography is great. And
the film, I have to say, I think we all enjoyed it thoroughly.
Very, very good.
Make a thumbs up from here. Okay.
Yeah. It's In Conversation.
We did promise him that we'd spread the word. I don't think it's officially released January.
Before summer.
No, next summer.
Or summer, sorry.
Before summer next year is when they're hoping.
He said we were his target demographic for the movie, and he was very, very happy with our reaction. So
we also saw 8th Grade, directed by Bo Burnham.
Okay.
And it was very good.
Bo Burnham's made a film.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
It was a good film. It made me feel so many different things. Like the dialogue intentionally is very awkward and clunky. It's about a kid in 8th grade who's quite socially awkward, and some of the dialogue just makes you sit there and cringe. But I think that was the purpose of the film.
Yeah. I saw him live probably 8 years ago up at the comedy festival in the Ivy Gardens. It's been a long day. I'm going to lose a lot of words in the middle of this. As we're recording this, it's only 3:00 in the afternoon, but it's been a very long day.
Which is my first question, Rick. Why aren't you doing your show?
Yeah, we only realised this at about 2:00. We were like, hey.
So recently, for people who don't know, Rick has made the move to RTÉ Gold from 2FM.
And bonus points for you, well done.
Yeah,
well
RTÉ Gold is an online station, but your slot is technically live.
Mm-hmm. It is.
From 3 to 6 weekdays. It's now 2:57 on a Thursday afternoon.
As we've already stated, in Shinoan Residence.
We're not in Donegal.
No, this is true.
So Cane Fall.
That's because about 8 weeks ago my show moved to 10 to 1. I don't do that show anymore.
Oh,
minus 6 points on research.
Ooh. Damn.
I finished my show at 1 o'clock. That's why I'm here, and
Look at that.
and that's ruined our entire interview. It's just red faces everywhere. There's no visuals to this, but there are.
There is.
There are visuals.
I'm really regretting that we set up the video cameras today.
So to be honest with you, the weird thing about doing radio for so long is you realise quite quickly that people don't notice when things change. Radio is a bit like one of those giant container vessels that brings oil around the world. It takes a long time to turn one of those around. So the same with people. It takes a long time for people to notice you've even disappeared from. I'm glad you noticed that it wasn't on 2FM. That's impressive.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm here with you guys.
Okay. We'll
you were hoping for some sort of scandal. There's not one.
Well, actually, no, because I was going to ask because it was a bit relevant today because my friend Dylan has a slot on RTÉ Pulse from 10 to 11 or 11 to 12. But he's not making his show this weekend because he's working the DCU Open Day. So he actually pre-rec'd his show in the DCU FM studio and he's going to send it in. So I thought that would him, but a pre-rec for 3 hours would be
the weird thing about it is that there's a lot of shows on Gold that are recorded and always have been. Gold's been knocking around for about 10 years, so it's not really a new thing. But it's had daily live programming since Will and I went on to it a little over a year ago. It was a year ago, 2 weeks ago. So there's a big chunk of everything that's live every day, but then there are other shows that run around just because of studio availability and because of people availability and all that.
Oh, we were in the Gold studio.
We were,
we were when we went to RTÉ to interview Dave Fanning. He took us to the Gold studio, and then actually we had to move because somebody was using the studio.
Somebody had real work to do.
Yeah, somebody had real work to do. They had to kick out the amateurs, and we moved to.
Do you like my window? That's a big window. You get
it's a great window.
Yeah, lovely.
And the bit where you sit opposite there is the bit where they put in important guests for Radio 1. So, if someone's coming in to do something half serious on Radio 1, you get to, have a nose at them while they're having a coffee and sandwich.
Very good.
So, you were initially born in Drimnagh. You lived there. Your mum and dad they lived beside each other on opposing balconies.
Oh, I loved it. Where'd you get that from? That's impressive. Good.
Greg is an investigative journalist.
Okay, you've done the research now.
Yeah. So they lived on opposing balconies and what?
My mum originally grew up in a tenement on Clanbrassil Street in Dublin. No, people were still living in tenements in the early 1960s, and they were one of the last ones moved out when they were making Clanbrassil Street. You know anything about Clanbrassil Street, near St Patrick's Cathedral there. They were supposed to be making it wider in the 60s, and so everybody there was moved out, and they demolished it, and they were all moved out to the new flats, where it was all modern and exciting and all that. My mum ended up being moved there, and then on the balcony across, so my mum was living in, if you could imagine, 3 sets of flats, quite a small little block of flats in a U shape, and each of them had like two levels on them on the balconies. And on the other side, over to the left, was my granny and my dad, and he lived there. And it was a very small group of people. It wasn't a big complex. So if you were of the same age and you were around that, and I mean they were both in their kind of mid-20s at that stage. You kind of got to know people, and then you got to know people, and they got to know each other, and I liked playing it out as a Romeo and Juliet thing. It was true.
Sounds like a romantic movie, yeah.
And they did, and that was where they met, and that was where I was born. And I spent the first year of my life living in my granny's flat, and then they got an exciting new house in Crumlin, where they moved out to Crumlin, where I grew up.
Very good. And then
good digging. That's really impressive. I've only mentioned that a couple of times. That's worryingly excessive.
I do like to dig. I do like to dig.
Good.
I like to stir as well, which you'll also come to learn.
He does like to stir.
So, from there, you talk to us about your interest in radio. Where did that come from? I believe it was quite a young age.
I didn't see. Here's the thing. I was interested in radio because it was on around me. So, my mum and dad would have listened to. I grew up in an era, I know this is impossible for some people listening to this to believe, where, commercial radio wasn't a thing in this country. The only place that played pop music was RTÉ Radio 2, and that was, when the Dave Fannings and Larry Gogans, and they were, and are the big superstars that they are. But they were the only game in town. So if you wanted to hear music, you didn't really. You either heard it there or you bought records. That was the only place you could get stuff. So I was only interested in radio insofar as that's where I found music, and I really, really like music. Dublin had the big pirate stations in those days, the names of all of which have now been stolen and repurposed, as is the way. So the Sunshines and the Qs and the Novas all existed. I never really wanted to be in radio, though. I had no interest in it. I entered a competition when I was 15 because there was a big stack of stuff to be won.
10 grand.
It was everything from it. It wasn't like money, cold hard cash. It was like you got a year's worth of Extravision rentals, and it was you got the rental of a boat for a year. I lived in Crumlin. What were we going to do with a boat? But it seemed really exciting, and there were posters up in our local Extravision which had only just opened, and I just went, yeah, give that a go. And I entered the competition, and I was 15, and I got through to. They initially did it over the course of a few months, and everybody did it on the phone, and you were doing your DJ demo on the phone. And then they did a bunch of semi-finals where they brought people out to Sunshine Studios, which were hidden in a set of porta cabins out behind the Sands Hotel in Portmarnock. Nobody knew this. This was a kind of because in theory they were illegal.
Undercover operation.
They were doing something that was technically illegal, but blind eye turned to. And I got into the final. And I lost, rightly so, because I was 15. What were you going to do giving all that stuff to a 15-year-old kid? But I met a load of people who ran the place at the time who ended up staying involved in radio. I didn't think much more of it other than I was 15, so I went, yeah, okay. And I finished school, I did my leaving cert, and in the summer between school and college, I had nothing to do, I was knocking around. So I went to what was then the hospital radio station in the nearest hospital where we were, which was St James's. They don't have one there anymore, but they did then. And I rolled up to the door and said, lads, any chance? I was on a competition on the radio. And they went, yeah, we're looking for new people. All right, come on in. I had no sense of what to do. Because when you did a competition on the radio, they put you in front of a microphone and you stand there and go, yeah. So I had to learn things like fader up, fader down, how to start music, all that kind of stuff. And I did that for about 6 weeks before I started college. And I rocked into UCD again, right time, right place.
Oh, they started up
They were starting their student radio station that year, so it was the first year UCD ever did one, was the summer of 91.
And you were studying in DCU or UCD?
Arts.
I tried.
What did you do?
I did history, I did English and philosophy. Now when you say
heavy.
They were heavy.
Until you realised that philosophy is...
No, do you know what? It was what I really thought would make sense. It was what I wanted to do. I had no idea what I wanted to do in life. Who does when you're 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 20? Who really knows what you want to do?
It's funny because Dave Fanning did philosophy as well.
Oh, he did?
I did philosophy for a year.
But look at you.
Yeah, and it's a lot of hard work, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a lot of brain work.
Yeah.
It's a lot of, it's not like you can just input simple things and then other things come out the other end. Philosophy involves serious thinking.
Greg is also a former art student.
I did arts in NUIG.
And how did that go?
I'm sitting here today, aren't I?
Okay.
So
You're sitting beside Rick O'Shea.
Yeah, exactly. That's his point.
In a student apartment in Shannon Square, I did philosophy, I did English, and I did IT.
Mm-hmm.
And I did law. We had 2-4 in NUIG for first year, and then 2 from there on. So I went with English and IT, but I did 2 years of my 3-year degree and had no motivation whatsoever to go back. I really just didn't want to do it, so I made a difficult decision and I dropped out, and I worked with a large multinational corporation.
Mm-hmm.
We're not allowed named for NDA reasons, and but you all know who the fuck I'm talking about. And
other large conglomerates are available. Those guys.
I worked there for.
There's a camera.
Worked there for a while, and made the decision to come back to college.
And what are you doing now?
Doing communications. We're all doing communications.
Oh, sweet mother God. Here's the thing. And if it's any consolation to anybody who ends taking this up, I didn't have enough points to get into communications in DCU.
Oh,
it was my first choice. So on my CAO form, my first choice was communications in DCU, which I knew I wasn't going to have the points for in 1991 because the points were mental. I'm sure they're still mental today, and you guys are absolutely brilliant. But the points were really serious in.
Can you remember what 91. They were?
No, I think it was 460 or 470 or something.
They're something. They went down this year. I think they're at 405 or something like that.
You got to remember, I come from an old system as well, where it was all done in Roman numerals and it was all it was very complicated.
Rick, I'm a mature student.
Yeah, look, neither here nor there. You're not this mature. I tried and I couldn't, and that's how I ended up doing arts. And I dropped out at the end of my first year because I didn't go to any of my exams.
And then you went to Bally?
Yeah, I realised I wanted to do radio. Halfway through that year, I'd been a presenter on the student radio station at the beginning of the year. They had 2 licenses, year beginning and year end. And by the time we got to the year end, a couple of guys had dropped out, so I became the programme director. And I programmed everything, so I did the whole end of year stuff, and I went, yeah, this could be a thing. I went, looked around, Ballyfermot was the place to go at the time, and then I did a year of broadcasting and journalism there, so that was everything from TV to print to radio.
Right,
we were with another Ballyfermot alum.
Yeah, and by the end of that, I'd been knocking around doing radio stuff in the background after that. I'd been working on East Coast doing weekends, mainly as a runner on their sports show. I was the guy who'd bring stuff in and out studio, and scores would happen here, and I'd have audio clips of stuff back in the old days when you physically had to bring things from one place to another, as opposed to transferring files. And then I got offered a job at the end of my first year in Ballyfermot, an actual presenter job 6 nights a week, and I had a choice. I could either do year 2 or I could go and get paid to do a job. And when I say paid, I mean I was paid, and I love saying this, £60 a week to work 6 nights a week, and that was not a lot of money in those days. You know when people say that's a lot of money in those days? It wasn't a lot of money in those days.
No.
It would have covered half my rent at the time.
God.
And that was where then?
In Bray, when I was working out there. So I physically moved out to Bray and got the job there, and I've been swinging from vine to vine to vine ever since.
That's not entirely true. You did spend quite a period of time with RTÉ.
To be fair, you're right. I spent working in East Coast maybe about 6 months as an actual job. I spent 6 weeks in the Southeast because then I got offered the job in Atlantic 252. I was there for a year and a half. I was at 104 for 5.5, and I've been with RTÉ. It gets weirder every year. I say it's 17 years I've been in the door, which is bonkers, and that's only going to get worse. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Right? I mean that for somebody like me who does what I do, to get paid to do what you do for as long as I've been doing it, there's not a lot of that happens, you know, because a lot of people who do the job I do, it's incredibly it's the sort of job that there's no stability in, and for you to be in one place now, admittedly in different stations doing different things, and then put in one spot for 17 years is lovely.
So how did the position with the national broadcaster present itself to you then?
So yeah, you were in FM 104 for what, like 5.5 years?
Yeah.
How does it come up? So
well, it came up like all good things at a Tina Turner gig. I didn't really like Tina Turner. I didn't really want to go to the gigs. It was whatever that summer was of 2000, and there were big gigs happening in the RDS, as there usually are every summer. I didn't really care. The two I went to were Tina Turner and Bon Jovi, and I didn't really care about either of them. Some things don't change, Bon Jovi, summer RDS. But I went to the gigs because, you know, I worked in the radio station, we got free tickets. You know, it was the summer, you go and yeah, feck it, look, come on, we'll go out, we'll have a few beers, we'll go to the gig. And I was at the first gig, and I was sitting in a row, and the guy sitting behind me looked vaguely familiar. And I kind of knew him, and I go, you have that thing where you're going, I know who you are, we've done something somewhere before. I'm the world's worst parent, thing of remembering people's names, faces, all that kind of stuff. I will remember that I met you somewhere 7 years ago, but I have no idea where it was, and I have no idea the context. So the guy behind me, I was with my then wife, and she looked, and I went off to the bathroom, and your mum was looking out to see where I was, and she had a few drinks, turned around and said to him, it's okay, he'll be back, you can talk to him in a minute. And it turned out that was Liam Thompson. Liam is probably the person who changed my broadcasting life more than anyone else, because Liam and I went to college together, although I didn't really realise it. Liam had been one of the newsreaders on the student station. He was in college around the same time I was, and he was also working for 98 at the time. He'd been doing some production bits and pieces. By the time 2000 rolls around, Liam was the deputy PD in 2FM, and we got talking afterwards. We'd had a couple of drinks, and he did the whole, you know, you've never had a look around, you just come in and have a look around. And I thought, that's really nice of him, he seems nice. You know, we never really knew each other in college, but okay. And I came in at some stage a couple of months later, and I got the grand tour. And you know, the radio building in RTÉ, if you've ever been to it, and you guys have,
indeed, yeah.
It's you know, it's nice to look at. I was working in 104, where there were one main studio in 104, one production studio, bunch of offices, and a sales department, and that was the whole setup. You go into RTÉ and you realise that there's a room for recording the concert orchestra in.
Yeah.
It's slightly more, more
elaborate,
just a little bit, yeah. And there's about 8, 9, 10 active broadcast studios, as well as all the stuff upstairs. So we did the wander around, and he brought me up to introduce me to the then head of 2FM, a guy called John Clark. And he said, come in, sit down with me. And John gave me the immortal line which changed my life, which was, so are they keeping you happy over there? And that was the moment when I went, I'm not here for a wander around, I'm here for something different. Yeah. So I had a chat with them, but I just signed a new contract, and I had to chat with them, and I couldn't do anything. I said, lads, I've just signed a new, it was a 2-year contract, I think, at that stage. So, like, can we keep this door open? Because I like what you do here, and I've always wanted to do all of this, and this is RTÉ, and this is great. And about 6 months later, 104 decided they didn't want me anymore. They fired me. So
did they actually fire you? Like,
no. I was kind of told, there are changes happening, and you're not part of the, which happens in our business all the time. You're not part of the thing.
I didn't want to bring it up, but Greg is on the way out.
It's about, and that, you know, unfortunately, when it happens, there will be other opportunities, and there are other podcasts in the sea.
That's what I've said.
It will
change, bigger and better things.
And so I had a conversation with the head guy in 104, who was lovely to me about it at the time. The guy who was the actual head of 104, and I said, okay, fair enough. And I walked out of the building, I rang Liam and said, can I come over and have a chat with you? And I walked into RTÉ about half an hour later and I said, okay, I'm now fired. What have you got something for me? It took a while, it took about 6 months for them to shuffle something in and around. But then he said, yeah, no, we found something for you. I was doing 11 to midnight, 5 nights a week, which was the thinnest possible way to make the schedule. But I had freedom to play whatever I want. I had freedom to do whatever I wanted. I was 28. I was working for the national broadcaster, and I got to play a lot of really loud music that would have been considered entirely offensive in 104 that I really liked.
What did you do for the 6 months?
I was paid off to the end of my contract.
Very good.
So but I was under contract, and they wanted rid of me. So they said, "We'll pay you off to the end of the contract." And I went, "Okay."
Paid not to work. I mean,
yeah. And do you know what? It was fine. And if things hadn't have worked out, I was looking for other jobs anyway. I'd been offered another job down the country, and I could have taken that job. And I was on the verge of taking it when 2FM came and said,
"We do."
No,
actually.
why don't we try this? And it may seem, it's weird, it may seem like a terrible thing to have happened for you to get fired and lose your job after being somewhere, but given the way things worked at that stage, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if I hadn't have gone through that whole process. So
it's a lot, like a lot of our guests, it has been luck and timing that they owe their careers to. It does seem like a pattern that's forming now.
Timing is everything.
Yeah, very much so.
And when you actually went to Ballyfermot, so what year roughly would that have been?
I was there 92 to 93.
Okay, so the course had actually been running there for...
It was what was called BJS, Broadcasting and Journalism Studies. So it was before Ballyfermot had even become BCFE now. It was called Senior College Ballyfermot in those days. Before they'd opened any nice donut joints in Ballyfermot. Because I've been up since then and I've done a few bits and pieces with them up there. Before they had that giant new building with the gorgeous new studios and all of that stuff. We were in kind of some boxes at the back, but it was nice. And I met a few guys there. There were 2 guys who were in my year, who these days are still daytime presenters on stations in Dublin. Marty Miller from Nova and Barry Dunn on 98. Both of them, the 3 of us were in the same year in college, and we met while we were there. And out of everybody who was in that year, the 3 of us were all still on the radio 5 days a week, which is a fairly high enough strike rate.
So you had your 11 o'clock to midnight slot. So how long did that keep you going for?
It wasn't long. I got shifted from that after about, I think, 8, 9, 10 months, and they moved me to 9 to 11. Because the thing is, I was in 2FM for a long time where schedules changed the way the wind did. So I counted at one stage, and over the years I think I'd done 15 different time slots in 2FM. I had done 11 to midnight, 9 to 11, I'd done 8 to 10, I did 6 to 9 at one stage, I did breakfast, I was back on 8 to 10 again in the evenings, I did about 3 different slots in the middle of the day. I did weekends then for...
And was there any ones that you preferred doing?
This is going to sound terrible, and it's going to sound like it's the least plausible reason for liking doing something. I loved doing shows that were during the day, primarily because you get to have a real life like normal people. I did breakfast for 6 months, in which I was up at 4 o'clock every morning.
Yeah.
I aged 10 years in 6 months. I'd never want to go back to that again. Some people have it. Some people have, they're built that way. The Ian Dempseys of this world are wired to be those people.
Ian told us that he doesn't actually, he's just used to it now. This stage he's been doing breakfast for so long.
He's just trained himself.
Absolutely. And I have nothing but admiration for people who do that.
Joe as well, the same.
Yeah.
He said he was up at 4 or 5 every morning.
Yeah.
I couldn't. I'd be like I couldn't do that now.
You'd be surprised. You'd probably get.
If you get into a routine, possibly, but especially like Greg is not a morning person, and that's 10 a.m. is fairly hairy for him now.
Stop calling me out like Colin. My dad will listen to this.
What about the nighttime slots?
Hi, Dad. Nighttime slots but that's worse the other way around, because then you don't get to be around when people are doing stuff.
Yeah.
So when I was younger, when I was in 2FM, for most of the time I was on 2FM, and I was there for 16 odd years. For about 9 of those years, or 9 of those years, I was on night times in one form or another. So it's great. You don't have to get up at a certain time. You get to knock around during the day. But I mean, I had kids when my eldest son is 20 now at this stage. So I had my son when I was 25. So it wasn't like I was living la vida loca when I was 28 and I had no responsibilities and no whatever. I was still getting up with a kid every morning and still doing all of that stuff, and then going into work at night and doing that. So it means you don't get to go to gigs. It means you don't get to go to... I go to the theatre a lot, so you don't really get to do that kind of stuff either. And when people are having birthday parties or just going out for a few drinks, you don't get to do that kind of stuff.
So you have to pause your day up until I go to work, which is...
Absolutely. And no one's around during the day to do stuff with you once you reach a certain point in time.
They work
people have
jobs.
They've got real jobs.
And for all the different slots you had, was preparation different every time, or was it usually the same?
No, different every single time. Depends on the sort of show you do, when I started off doing the nighttime shows, the first couple of ones I did, they were music based, and they were mainly new music based. So the only prep you did was new stuff came in, you listened to it, you decided if you liked it or not, and then you went, okay, we're playing the new Arctic Monkeys album, off we go. I remember the night the first Arctic Monkeys album came in, myself and Dan Hegarty, who now still does music stuff for 2FM, and the album came in, and both of us sat there with a CD player in the office, because there was no one else around, and just turned it on, and slack-jawed went, right, we better start playing this, hadn't we? Okay. So part of the job was that, and there was mostly that for that kind of job. Breakfasts are a completely different thing because it involves a lot of news, current affairs. You know, it's a music-based show, but you have news junctions you have to hit. Traffic stuff happens in there. Your sports guy comes in. You do all of this kind of stuff. It's very, very, very hectic. And for the last few years when I was on the daytime show with Cormac, we just sat there, prepped the show every morning. We came across a bunch of stuff we liked to look up on the internet. We'd have a meeting for an hour, throw everything on the table and go, okay, what are we going to talk about? And myself, Cormac and Michael, our producer, would all go, okay, that seems good. We're going to talk about that. I'm really interested in that. Here's something that happened to me yesterday. You picked 6 things over a 3-hour show. And we would then, the two of us, pretty much sit and talk utter nonsense, and we developed it into a fine art over the space of the 3.5 years we did that show. I like to think that we can still do it today. So for every show, prep is different. For some shows, there's no prep involved. For some shows, there's hours worth of it, depending on the type of show you're doing and what you're doing. As well, you guys know, this podcast will end up with you guys having done probably 4 times the amount of time prepping all of this stuff than the actual time it takes to do the interview. But that's the fun of interviews. Coffee's very good, by the way.
Yeah,
coffee is, do you know what, for instant, this is espresso coffee.
Yeah, actually, while we're at this, anybody want another cup of coffee?
I'm okay.
I'm great with what I have. No, I'm good. Thank you.
So what I was going to ask is, how much license did you have when you were playing the popular music and stuff like that to play what you liked versus what was popular at the time that you might not necessarily have liked?
It depends on where you are. If you're on after 7 o'clock at night, usually in most stations, you will have a huge amount of freedom with what it is you get to play. So that covers for night times on 2FM these days, it covers for night times on the likes of Today FM, stuff that they do over there. For some of the commercial stations, you'll have a certain amount of freedom. Chances are, if you're on between 7 and 7, you don't. And I mean, for the last 7-8 years that I was on 2FM, I had pretty much no say at all in any of the music that was played on the show. Full stop. It's a playlist and you play for it.
I know, I listen to Dermot and Dave quite often, and love the guys, great show, but a lot of theirs, it's very repetitive in what songs do crop up on the show every now and then. Not even necessarily like the newest songs, but just what's been popular in the past 3 or 4 months. Usually crops up again and again and again.
Was there any song on the charts that really did your head in that you had to play though? I
developed, and I suppose I shouldn't really admit this out loud, but I'm going to anyway. I developed a nice filter whereby I stopped hearing the music after. So there reached a point, and it's fair in that that's one of the reasons why I needed to move on from 2FM. I reached a point in maybe the last 3 years when I was in 2FM where you liked certain stuff and you really liked playing it, and there was 80% of everything, particularly when everything got really EDM heavy for a while, 80% of everything, it was like listening to white noise, and I didn't have to hear it because we were concentrating on the stuff we were doing in between all of that. I was doing a show on 2XM at the time as well, which I did for fun because mostly I like guitar music. I like things that have extremely loud bands in them. So the stuff I did like, I was getting it by doing that particular show there. But you know, it's one of those things about being a radio presenter. If you're working on playlist format, you're not paid to play the music. You're paid to do the bits in between that. So your job is to be good at doing all of that stuff. But yeah, after a while, now when I was in Atlantic 252, we used to play our highest rotation songs every 90 minutes. So even now, there are certain bands that I have like PTSD with. M People is one of them. Runaway Train by Soul Asylum is one of those songs. Anything by the Lighthouse Family. There are about 5 or 6 bands that I it was like being in Abu Ghraib. It just wasn't pleasant.
I work in a security monitoring station, and I have these 12-hour shifts. This is back home in Cavan, and so for 12 hours I have to listen to the same radio station for the whole time.
What is the radio station?
Q102. That's like a 90-minute rotation of Adele, Bruno Mars, Ed Sheeran, and if I hear Perfect one more time, I don't know what I'm going to do, lads. I don't know.
Is it that, and Cormac tells this story as well, Cormac Battle, who I used to do the show with, the wonderful Cormac Battle from CFM, tells the story that when in his earlier days he used to work in security as well, and what they would do is they'd take the radio, they'd leave the radio inside an office, lock the door, and then go home, so he had no ability to change any of that. So he again went through a similar situation.
I work in a hotel, and every Saturday night we do live entertainment. It's the same 10 out lads that come with their one-man band, a keyboard, and play their lovely country western tunes.
Of course.
And like you said, it's quite nice. To me at this stage, people ask me when I come in and say, "Who's the music tonight?"
It's the same.
All of our clientele are generally above the age of 70.
Okay.
And I'll say, the usual, that's it.
That's all you need. That's a good term. Yeah.
It's elaborate, you know?
Thankfully for me, it's just we're not allowed. I don't think we're allowed to play radio over our speakers anyway, because I think you need a license in shops or something like that to play.
Yeah, I'm sure you do something.
Yeah. But yeah, we just have an iPod playlist, and that's usually just background noise, so I don't have to listen to it. What I was going to ask Rick is actually, as like a music DJ, do you ever find your music listening habits are affected by your work? Do you ever get jaded and you're just kind of sick of music and you just can't do it at home?
Yeah, no, well, yeah and no. Yeah, insofar as you find yourself not really able to listen to pop music at all. So for years, I've taken like sharp left-hand turns. I listen to a lot of jazz. I listen to a lot of classical music. I listen to a lot of a lot of the Leonard Cohens and Bob Dylans and Van Morrisons and Lou Reeds of this world. I find I can't listen to radio. I don't listen to radio at all, pretty much, unless it's news and current affairs stuff or unless it's lyric. And it's that reason. It's that thing about, if you work at McDonald's, you don't want to go home and eat McDonald's. You can't, because it surrounds you all day, every day. So you need something that and it's that weird thing that's happened to me since I've moved to Gold. Now that I do a show every day where I have the choice to play anything I want, and I can, I've now found myself taking a load of stuff that I would have listened to for pleasure, and I've now got to put that to one side and listen to something else as well, because I'm now listening to that all day, every day, but in a good way, because now I'm the one who's getting to choose. So yeah, no, you do, absolutely.
Over the years, and I suppose like you've discussed there how like your time slots have changed, radically over the years, like even the nature of the shows in general has shifted. Like, is it hard to maintain, I suppose, the draw for radio and for what you do, like on an everyday basis?
Yeah, it is from time to time. It depends on. There were years where I was working for RTÉ where I hated what I was doing, because of the show I was on and because I developed no love for what it was I was doing. Most presenters won't admit to that, but it happens to everybody if you've been doing any job for long enough. There have been years where I loved going into work every single day because I loved what was happening and where I was. And that does change and depends on the nature of the show and what you're being asked to do. Sometimes on the time you're working as well. Because, at the moment, I'm now lucky enough to be working a program that allows me to work a roughly 9 to 5 day. And that's not a terrible aspiration to have. You don't have to deal with early mornings or late nights. So instead I can come in, at 9 o'clock, do stuff, do the show, have lunch, do a few bits and pieces, and then I'm gone, which is kind of cool. But it does, and there were whole entire years where I thought I was going to give up radio and where I thought I couldn't do this anymore. It was a long time ago, and I got over it. But yeah, absolutely.
So was the transition from 2FM to RTÉ Gold something that you pushed for yourself?
No, not at all. It was something that happened relatively quickly. I say quickly. Gold has been around for 10 years. People have been, paying a lot of attention to Gold over the last while because now we've live programs every day, and because myself and Will talk about it a lot on social, and because there's a lot of that going on. Gold's had an audience for a really long time. Although, to be fair, all day, every day, it was mostly just jukebox music. It was mostly just a computer putting out stuff. There were pre-recorded shows that went out during the week, really good ones done by great presenters. And it's only that RTÉ reached a point where I think they had made a decision, well, we can do one of two things here. We're either just wasting our time with this and we should just move on to something else, or we should actually do this properly. I think that coincided quite nicely with 2FM wanting to and needing to make changes, which helped, because it's that weird thing, but the BBC have a brilliant succession policy and always have, in that you start off, for many people, they started off in the BBC on BBC Radio 1, you start off serving a certain sort of audience. You do reach a point where you probably shouldn't be there anymore. But then the BBC is full of other stations, your BBC Radio 2s and your Radio 5s, where you can be moved into a different part of the family, because ultimately they spend a lot of time building you up as a, quote, household name, end quote. And the last thing they really want is for you to go off somewhere else and take all of that goodwill and capital to the other side of the road. So the BBC have a great way of doing that. They take the Chris Evanses and the Simon Mayos of this world and they can move them with the audience. RTÉ never had the ability to do that and never really got the chance to. So over the years, there were tons of amazing presenters who are all working on TFM. The Tony Fentons of this world, rest him, the Gareth O'Callaghan's, the Mike Maloney's, the loads of guys who all spent years building up those profiles, and then having nowhere else to go, and then going, okay, well, we've got to go somewhere else with this, and moving off and doing stuff somewhere else. Luckily, Aidan Leonard, who was a 2FM presenter not so long ago, is the guy who runs Gold these days. Will was really enthusiastic about doing the Gold project, and they just brought me in and said, listen, we want you to go back on 5 days a week, and we want you to essentially play whatever you want. That's not a hard sell. It really isn't. It's the combination of, it's a brand new project, it's something new you've never done before, it's the freedom that was afforded.
Sink your teeth
with
into
that.
kind of.
Yeah. You know, I did have a conversation about it, so if I want to go in and just, play 5 David Bowie songs to start the show, I can do that, right? Yeah, of course you can. Okay, that's easily doable. And I was working weekends at the time as well, which I hated. I didn't like working weekends.
Was that from a family aspect, or just from?
No, absolutely that. And it made family time hard and complicated, and it meant that I was working at a lot of times when things were going on, both in my own family and in the greater world, where I should have been off doing stuff. You can never take a weekend off and go away, because my wife works 5 days a week, and I was working the other
her days off, or your.
Yeah. So it was something as simple as that, and I did that for a couple of years, and so when something nice came along, I bit their hand on totally. Yeah.
So we've talked a lot about radio, and in RTÉ it's a common theme that successful TV personalities have made their start at radio. Has TV ever been a big possibility for you? Something that you've put your eye on?
Do I look like I belong on TV? Reasonable. I don't know. I'm far too much of a practical mindset in that I know a load of people who work in TV. TV is a really tough job. TV is a job that, unless you are one of probably 2 or 3 or 4 people in RTÉ, you have no guarantees of anything. So unless you're Ryan doing the late
Miriam,
or unless you're Miriam on Miriam or Dave McCull on primetime, or unless you're these days Ray doing Saturday nights, and Marty and Sinead, let's be honest, doing, because they tried taking Marty and Sinead off the lottery show, and and all of a sudden people went, where have Marty and Sinead gone? And then they brought them back, fair play to them. So there's a little bit, unless you're one of a really small group of people, you have no solidity. You can end up being on TV, and people go, oh, you're that guy or that girl from TV. You might work 13 weeks in a year on a single series, and for most people that's not enough to pay the bills or keep things going. Radio has solidity. You work 52 weeks a year. So while I would have loved to have, and would still love to, he said, do something in TV, and I've fiddled around with little bits and pieces over the years, I've never pushed to do it. I think if you want to be on TV, you've got to be seriously into it, and you've got to be the sort of person who pushes hard to make it happen. Maybe I'm too lazy, that's also a possibility, but that doesn't mean it will never happen. Has
the format ever maybe put you off? Because a lot of people we've spoke to, we said, they've done both, which do you prefer? And nearly all of them have categorically said radio, because there's a lot of things that you don't particularly appreciate. Like if you're on camera, every small fidget,
I hate seeing myself on camera.
Even to
I
today.
really do. Oh no, I can't. I don't look back. If I'm a guest on a show somewhere, or whatever, I just don't look at it.
Well, I have to say, without getting too far into it, you're looking great. Like we've seen previous pictures of you over the years.
I put a lot of effort into this. There's a lot of hard effort goes into this. No, and I'm fine. And as far as I'm concerned, my wife's really good at that. I just stand in front of her and go, "Does this look all right?" She goes, "Yeah, that's fine." I go, "Great." I don't even need to look at myself in the mirror. We're fine. I've always been uncomfortable with it. So probably doing it for a gig never really would have been the thing. Some people are very good at it, and it's only, I think, when you sit and you're a guest on a chat show or whatever, and you see the amount of, as you said, precision and time and effort that goes into something like that, and the reruns and the rehearsals and the, I remember doing one of the afternoon shows on RTÉ at one point, and they rehearsed the entire program essentially and done it prior to them doing the entire program live. On radio, you just walk in and it happens, and there's a liveness. You're there for 3 hours. That's what happens, and off you go. So there is an element of that to it too. Yeah, absolutely.
Radio is definitely the simpler medium. That's why I want to go into it anyway.
Yeah.
And you're also under a lot more control than you would be in TV. TV, there's a lot exponentially more things that could go wrong.
Factors outside your control as well.
Yeah, then radio is.
A lot of radio shows, even in our place, including mine, involve me going into a studio first thing in the morning, being in the right place at the right time, pressing a button at an appropriate time, and being the only person in the studio for 3 hours before I go away again. There's no such thing as a television show that's run by one person. Exactly. So you don't have a team of people to have to work your way around, or a lot of radio shows do, but for some of us we don't.
Exactly. So let's talk about music. because that is obviously a big part of your career. You play music on the radio. So your own personal musical taste, who was your early influences growing up and all that kind of thing?
I grew up in a household full of trad music. My dad was a major trad music fan. So he would have been going to gigs that Planksty were playing in 1969, and he was and still is an enormous trad music fan. Unless it has Uilleann pipes in it, I think my dad doesn't think it's worth listening to. My dad's a major music collector as well. So growing up in the house, it was like Planksty did and all that kind of stuff. My mum had the occasional draw for Demis Roussos or ABBA or whatever it was she was into at that stage, and then you grow up listening to whatever's on the radio. You get to a certain point in your life where you start developing your own tastes, and when I was 15, 16, 17, when I started properly buying music for myself, it was Bob Dylan and Lou Reed and Leonard Cohen and Van Morrison, and I got into classical music at that stage as well, because my dad had a stash of classical albums upstairs. Even though he had no real interest in them himself, he's just a collector. He just collects things. And so they were there when I needed them. When I came to him and said, so do you have Beethoven's Fifth Symphony anywhere? And he'd go, I'm sure I have it somewhere. And that was my first introduction to classical music too. And then you go to college. I got into the Pixies when I was in college properly. They were the first band, I think, the first week I arrived in college. I'd never heard the Pixies before, so that was good. Anything from the early to mid 1990s that had guitars in it, I've heard and probably owned at one point or another.
Oasis.
Oasis.
Yeah, Colin is a very big Oasis fan.
Massive.
And most guests we've mentioned Oasis to, they kind of mug them off. Colin gets very disappointed.
We haven't mentioned it that much, but yeah.
Dave had no time for them.
Well, I suppose he has no time for a lot of people.
Don't again.
That's a valid point, and Dave would accept that.
Yeah, I think he said it himself that he can be quite. Yeah, no, Oasis would be probably my favourite artist.
Yeah, I like Blur, but
we're on opposite sides of the table here, thankfully.
So, there's almost nothing that I won't like and haven't had a crack at. I developed a real draw when I was in my kind of mid-20s and further on for older music. So I think I only discovered Frank Sinatra when I was about 25. Mm-hmm. And he died. I think it was actually Sinatra died, and everybody made a big deal out of it. And to me, in my head, Sinatra was, My Way and New York, New York, to which I was both going, geez, songs that people sing at weddings. And it was only then afterwards where I went, all right, I'm going to give this a go. And I went back and listened to some of his earlier stuff, and it completely blew my mind. And then I got into stuff from the 30s and 40s and 50s and even further back, and then you get into the blues, and then and everything stretches out beyond that. So, I have a pretty decent handle on most things.
Yeah, I suppose as a radio DJ, you have to be a bit of a cinephile and have
Yeah, you do and you don't. I mean, because I never would have gotten to express any of that on the day job when I was doing the day job. Yeah. That's what you do when you're when you're driving the car long distances or when you're home in the evening.
Yeah, very good. And let's talk about live music. Are you a concert goer?
I was. I've fallen out over the last couple of years, and I don't know why. Is the honest truth. I think it might be. I was living in Wicklow for the last few years.
Oh no!
And it was fine. I was living in Greystones for 3 years, and you kind of fall out of coming into town to do stuff because there are no late buses and there's no late darts. And if you stay out after 11:30 on a Saturday night, you get a taxi home, and that costs you a fortune. So it's got to be something really serious you want to go out and do. So I used to be a major gig goer. I would go to see everything. I've been to the Electric Picnics and the then Oxygens of this world, both working for 2FM and doing it for fun. I've been to gigs in other countries where I've picked someone and gone, Stevie Wonder is playing in Birmingham, I'm going, which I did one year. Mostly the big experience stuff in the Three Arenas stuff is kind of fine, but getting to see somebody where you can see the whites of their eyes and the likes of the Olympia is quite nice.
I'm going to, me and Greg are going to see Florence and the Machine on Monday.
Oh,
fantastic. And then the next day I'm going to the Olympia, first time to see Interpol.
Okay, now you're talking about serious gig experiences. I saw Florence the first time she played off her first album for Nova and Lungs. Mm-hmm. So when Lungs came out, she did I think 2 gigs here in the space of about 18 months. One of them, she climbed up on the speaker stacks and ended up in the first row of balconies in the Olympia. The health and safety people are all going, she's going to fall. If that gig is in any way as good as the first time I saw Florence, that's going to be fantastic. And I've been there more times than I care to remember. The Olympia is a great spot to go and see gigs. Vicar Street too as well. Again, because you're nice up and close to people. Big gigs I've lost the graw for, unless it's Bruce Springsteen. I will go and see Bruce Springsteen do anything.
We that's a very common theme with our show. Bruce Springsteen.
Springsteen is a favourite of a lot of our guests as well.
And here's the thing: I can sense from your antipathy you're going, yes, Bruce Springsteen.
No, I actually have a lot of time for Springsteen's music. I haven't seen him live now.
Here's the thing. Okay, well, let me do a sales pitch for you.
Okay, go on.
I've never seen Springsteen prior to 2000. I think it was Christmas of 2007. My brother's a major Springsteen fan, and I arranged at the time to get tickets. Springsteen played in Belfast at Christmas. It was about 10 days before Christmas, and my brother really wanted to go. So I went on to the promoters and said, look lads, any chance? And they said, yeah, there's no problem, we'll be able to sort you out. He drove us to Belfast, and we saw Springsteen playing the Odyssey in Belfast. And I came into that going, I'm doing a favour for my brother. I came out of that going, where has this been all my life? Springsteen comes out and does these enormous gigs. I've seen him in the RDS, I've seen him in the Croke Park gig, the most recent Croke Park gig that he did. I've seen him about 6 times now. He plays for the bones of 3 3/4 hours with no interval and no break for a man who's in his 60s. Plays everything that you expect him to play, and then plays a ton of stuff that you've never heard him play before because he has this enormous back catalogue. Yeah. And you walk, and particularly if you get a chance to get into the pit and get up close to see what's going on. He does one section of the gig which I love, which is people bring signs to a Springsteen gig, usually on cardboard, and it's just got song names on them. And at some point he'll go right, and he goes out and grabs signs of people, sticks them on the floor in front of him. He'll point to a sign, looks back at the band and goes, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, and they play off the back catalogue. And in an act of magic, watching him do that. So after the first time I saw him, I would go see him do anything, anywhere. Prior to that point, really have cared less. It wouldn't have been
I think I mentioned this on the podcast before, but my uncle Jason is a massive Springsteen fan as well, and purely by chance he did 2 gigs that recent Croke Park the tour when he came to Ireland, and he did 2 gigs. His wife, my auntie-in-law, got him tickets for the first one, and his mother, my grandmother, got tickets for the second one. No communication between the two of them.
Okay.
Purely by chance, they'd both gotten him tickets for the 2 separate nights, and he went with his wife, my auntie-in-law, one of the nights, and then with a mate of his for the second night. And he said, probably one of the best 2-day periods of his life.
Yeah. I can easily understand.
Any other favourite gigs?
Loads.
What's your favourite festival, actually?
Festivals are tough. I hate festivals. Christ, I hate
Did
festivals.
you always hate festivals?
Yeah.
Or, okay.
Yeah.
Because you're just getting grumpier in your...
No, and I am getting grumpier in my old age. I really am, and I'm perfectly happy to own that. I'm good with that.
Sounds great.
I've only ever stayed at a festival once. I've only ever camped once, and I hated it. It was such an unpleasant experience.
Where was it?
It was Electric Picnic, which was fine, but I think we were really poorly put together in terms of our ability to camp. Now, I had mates who were staying close to us, and they helped us put the tent up, but we hadn't even brought an air mattress. We were sleeping on the ground. It was freezing cold. We hadn't really brought hoodies or anything proper to lash ourselves up in. I could have sworn David Kitt was playing the tent next to us till about 4 o'clock in the morning, and that was the only time I've ever done it, and I was miserable and I hated it.
I did my first festival this year. It was Electric Picnic as well with the 2 gentlemen.
We all made the trip down to lovely Laois.
And how was that?
It was great. I'm from Laois.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
he lives 10 minutes down the road, but we still only got in at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the Friday.
Hangovers kept every year after 20.
No, this isn't a hangover thing. It was going into the picnic for the first time. We still only went there at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
There's no need on Friday. You don't have to get there. All you want to do is drink 2 cans and fall over the place, Colin.
That's a valid point.
Yeah.
I will go with that.
But yeah, I was sleeping on the ground as well.
I actually did have an air mattress. I'm quite set up. That was my 9th picnic.
Okay.
I'm 25. So
that's still impressive.
Yeah.
Don't go jump on knocking.
So what I do every year is I get a pop-up tent. I get a single air mattress. I used to get a double one, but it doesn't fit.
No.
You have to deflate it a little bit. And as long as I have a big drug rug hoodie, like a Badger hoodie, and I have a woolly hat and extra socks, you can't go too wrong.
And a lot of wipes.
A lot.
Tons of wipes.
But I go home every day for a shower and a nap.
Yeah, you're not doing it properly.
Yeah.
No, you're cheating. I'm sorry. If you can get to go home every day for a shower and a nap, that's not really doing it.
I went a bit festival mad myself. I went to C Sessions in Bundoran. I went to Longitude on Saturday and then EP. And once I went to the Arctic Monkeys there, after all that, I was like, I don't like outdoor festivals anymore. Because the music, it's not there. You're not there for the music.
The atmosphere,
There for the atmosphere.
for outside, yeah, like the atmosphere of an outdoor gig is a lot different. And I made this point, especially with EP. I took two examples. Versatile were playing the Electric Arena, and they were like, even though it was technically a tent and it's technically outside, because everybody was kind of smushed together under this one big canvas, the atmosphere, like you could just hear everything and everyone, and it was great. And then immediately after Versatile was Kendrick Lamar, and he was open air, everybody spread out, and it wasn't nearly as good now. And I'm a big fan of Kendrick, but his music and just the whole, it just didn't translate to an open air gig. And
I think there's a huge amount to be said for that, for seeing people in tents and festivals. You're right, particularly the smaller the tent, the bigger the act, the greater.
I went to see
who knows what's going to happen.
Some of our previous guests, Heavy Rex, they're a hip hop duo from Kildare. I went to see them in the
that new song with the Blizzards.
I Need a Win.
Which actually is really good.
It's a very good song. And I saw them in the Little Big Tent on the Sunday, and that was great because there were more people showed up than they were actually expecting. I think about 150, 200 people all crashed together into this one small tent, and it was great.
I'm at that stage now whereby I can legitimately though use my kids as an excuse to go to gigs. You know, my son is 20 and my daughter is about to turn 15, so she brought me to Shawn Mendes, which fair enough wouldn't have been for me. But you know what? I went, and he can play guitar, and he's charismatic, and everybody around me was going mental for him. That was quite okay.
That's how I felt about Harry Styles. I went to Harry Styles for the first time in Manchester there last year, and I was like going into it, I was like, I'm just here for the girlfriend, and that's all I'm going for. And went, and it was a fantastic gig. Yeah, unbelievable. Yeah,
and I went to see Drake when Drake was in the 3 Arena as well. Now, as a 45-year-old man standing there with a pint in his hand, you might look a little strange, but when you've got your son standing next to you, also with a pint in his hand, he's good cover for what was an incredible gig. The night I saw him there, the two of us stood. We watched that enormous light show he did with the huge luminous ball that he had in the centre of the crowd, palm of his hand, and he was exceptional. So my son is a good ticket to get to go to gigs like that, and so I don't have to look like a weirdo.
So who's been going into a gig, you might have been throwing your eyes to the heavens, but who completely changed your perception? Like, I know you said Springsteen, but we'll leave him as an exception.
He definitely doesn't. My ma, and this is a true story, my ma made me go see Take That. When Take That had when they got back together, first of all, and Robbie Williams was on tour with them, and they were doing big Croke Park jiggery pokery. My mother developed a late life obsession for Take That. She never liked them in the 90s. Like, my mother's in her 70s. But when they came around second time round, she really loved the album, and she loved all the stuff in it. So she said, "Will you bring me to go to the gig?" I was like, "Yeah." And again, you think you're doing something really nice, and you're doing it for your man, you're bringing her to a gig. My mother had never been to a gig in Croke Park before. I'm not sure if my mother had ever been to Croke Park. But we went and saw Take That. And I came out of that going, okay, you guys know exactly what you're doing in terms of putting on this enormous stadium light show, and the fact that you feel like you're part of this out of body, out of this world experience. I may not necessarily have chosen to have gone myself, but I'm glad I did because of that. So maybe that's one of them, you know. And it's always nice to get dragged into things you might not be expecting.
Fair enough.
Moving on to another love of yours, Rick, books.
Love it when people talk books with me. Talk books with me.
So,
well, as we mentioned at the start of the show,
me
and Rick encountered each other at the Waterford Writers' Week.
And that's where you ambushed them.
But you enjoyed the weekend, Rick?
I did. It's for those people who don't know, and that's almost everybody. It's Waterford has its own festival every year, the Imagine Arts Festival, and the Waterford Writers' Weekend is part of that. It's small. We did 20 events or so this year. I've been the curator for the last 2 years. And you spend a bunch of months putting together a bunch of events, and you talk to authors, and you try to get people to come from the UK, and you get people from here, and you put together ideas, and hopefully it all comes together on the weekend. And this year was great. I learned a lot from the terrible mistakes I made in year one. I made one or two of those, and it was super. But that's most of my life these days, is outside of work, is spent interviewing authors in front of big rooms of people.
Yeah. And for people who don't know, you also have Ireland's largest book club.
Yeah.
What's it standing at about 22
and a bit thousand.
Yeah.
As of today.
And very recently, you've just raised quite a lot of money for the homeless people of Ireland.
I have no idea how that was going to work out. This is being recorded on it's a Thursday, and it's now 10 minutes to 4 in the afternoon. Tuesday of this week, we made a decision a while back, myself and my other half. We said, look, what we're going to do is we're going to try and use these 22,000 people to do something positive and good in the run-up to Christmas. The obvious idea is to do something for the homelessness crisis, because it is something that seems to be getting worse day by day by day by day, you would like to do something. Everybody wants to do something. You can only do something small scale yourself. If you have the ability to harness together a lot of people to try and make something bigger happen, then I think, you know, if you're somebody like me with some form of public profile, you have a moral obligation to do something like that. So I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask everybody to stick in a fiver. €5, that's all it's going to take. It's the price of a, you know, second-hand paperback. Mm-hmm. And if all of us were to do this, we'd raise 100 grand. That's never going to happen. If 1,000 of us were to do it, we'd raise €5,000. And I thought on Tuesday, that's a big aspiration. I'm going to run this until Christmas. We'll see where this goes. In the first 36 hours, we got past €5,000. It's now Thursday. We were just before I started the show. I'm checking it literally like their Instagram likes. We're at €8,500 and rising. So I raised the target to 10. Presumably before the weekend, I'm going to raise the target again to 20. And money keeps coming in because people do want to do something. And if you give them a small focal point where you can say, look, give a fiver. Now, we've had 2 people anonymously who've given over 500 quid. Wow. If I can guilt people with that kind of money into giving it, great. But yeah, so it's become that. And the book club has become the weirdest thing in the world. Because
it must be so time consuming for you, apart from obviously... But it's your hobby.
It's not time consuming in that you don't have to do a huge amount other than let people in and then make sure everybody's being nice to everybody else. And you know, you don't really have to monitor a lot of things because for 22,000 people on the internet, they're remarkably well behaved. And they tend not to have rows or, you know, get involved in flame wars.
Right, Rick, I want to ask you about social media because I don't think you're much of a fan of Facebook from what I've seen.
That depends on which bit of Facebook. Go on.
Well, there was a post about you not getting verified on the page and that you're quitting.
That was the straw that broke the camel's back. That made me seem like a petulant child. Do you know what it wasn't? It was, I've spent years engaged with Facebook. I had a page which I then dropped after a few years. I adopted Facebook very early on, dropped it, came back to it, and I've been using it for work purposes. So I had a work page. And the further and further I got on, and you'll talk to anybody who's got a business who runs a Facebook page at any point in the last, say, 3-4 years, Facebook have been throttling the numbers for people who run pages. So unless you're willing to pay cold hard cash in order to get your posts noticed, and exactly, you guys are making the us too. Remember, this is a podcast. So unless you're willing to pay cold hard cash, you won't get noticed. Yeah. And I'm not a business. I don't have the money to make that notice. You know, fair enough if you're going to make Coca-Cola or McDonald's or whatever pay to get their post noticed. Absolutely, great. They're a business. That should be a business model. But for people I know who've been involved in the likes of small charities or community groups who don't have money to get their posts seen, and I was at a stage where I had 15,000 followers, quote unquote, and your average post was getting seen by a couple of hundred people. Yeah. So that's madness, and therefore I'm just banging my head against a wall. And I just went, no, good luck, I'm done. And that was about 6 months ago. And has it affected me morally or, you know, integrally in life? Not really.
Mm-hmm. And what about Twitter and or Instagram?
I think Twitter's great. I foolishly got involved in Twitter very early on again, about 2006, something like that, because my mates are in the tech world who said, you should try this in this microblogging platform. And I did. And I like Twitter because its level of connectivity it allows people, I think, is breathtaking. I think if people want to talk to me or tell me something or say anything to me, you can do it right now. You can just tweet me. And I react or try to everything that comes in. The same way I can go, Eric Idle, I really love your book. And Eric Idle goes, thanks very much. That's weird. The ability to get... I think this is, and this happens to people all the time. I was in London last week and I went to the theatre the night I was there. And I looked about 4 rows behind me and I thought Guy Pearce was there, the actor. And he had a big beard, and I kind of thought, that's Guy Pearce. And I said to my wife, that's Guy Pearce. She did the look around thing, yeah, that's Guy Pearce. Yeah, that's him, all right. And the following day I was talking about the play online, and I said, and I think I saw Guy Pearce, you know, about 5 rows back, you know, he's looking really well, and he's got a great beard. To which Guy Pearce just hit the like button, he went like, and I went, it was Guy Pearce! So that ability for everybody to connect to people in that form of ways, astonishing. Yes, you balance that off with the dickheads, and the world is full of them. They are everywhere, and you can choose to block and report. You can choose to not engage. Thankfully, I don't get a lot of it. I think if I was somebody who operated in a public sphere like politics, particularly if I was a woman who's in any way involved in public life in Ireland, I don't know if I would find Twitter as usable as I do. But having said that, I do. Instagram's kind of the crack these days. I like pretty pictures. I like taking pretty pictures of things, stuff that I find, books that have just come in, or So I quite like that. I try to take a minimum amount of pictures of my food. There's very little of that knocking on, and so I do. I quite like Instagram, but I try to spend as little time as possible on social. I'm on social in work every morning from the time I arrive until the time I leave. I don't really do it during the rest of the day or at night ever, and I don't really do it at weekends ever unless I'm doing gigs. I stay completely off social.
And what about social as promotional tools? Do you find them effective?
Facebook, no. Although weirdly, of course, my book club is run as a Facebook group, but weirdly that operates in a completely different form. Because it's a group, people seem to make the effort to go into the group to see what's happening. They walk through the door themselves. They're not waiting for it to turn up in their news.
I think with group posts, because they're group, they're kind of very specific interest. Their posts tend to come up more often and at the top of your feed, rather than page posts. I've found. I think that's
very much can be that. Yeah. And in terms of I've managed to get I've harnessed Facebook as the book club to earn $8,500 for charity in the last 3 days. You use Twitter as a tool to amplify that and then get more people out there and talking about it, and to get them to talk about it too. It's useful. I think there are some people who treat it as the be all and end all of everything, and unfortunately it's not, because there is so much chatter on every social media platform. If you get in any way noticed, you've done really well.
Did you see the donations reaching the level that they have so far?
Oh no, I thought we will scrabble to get $5,000 by Christmas. I've set it to finish on December 31st. I thought if we've managed to get that far, I will be perfectly happy. We will have done this really well. We did it in 36 hours, and now I'm going, okay, what can we really do with this then? And I haven't had any media coverage on this. This hasn't appeared in a single newspaper or on any website. No one's talked about it on the radio. I have mates who do that kind of thing. I can get them to talk about it. And now all of a sudden I'm
thinking, us.
Yeah, but now all of a sudden I'm thinking, that we could...
There is one article online.
There is one, the extra.ie one from yesterday. So we've had one so far. You really have spent a lot of time doing the prep for this. Have you considered the job as a researcher?
Thanks.
It's really impressive. Well done.
Well, actually, on that, funny enough, I've been a freelance journalist for a couple of years. A couple of years. My first front page story was as a 16-year-old, and the headline was "Sex Door Neighbours." Nice. And it was about a brothel that I did a bit of investigative journalism and uncovered.
Did you write the headline? Were you subheading that as well? So you did the headline too? Yeah. You see, that's a genuine art form that tabloid newspapers are never going to not need, just in the off chance. I mean,
funny enough, when my mum, when I left the newspaper that I worked there for the summer, I did it full time over the summer. When I left, I was presented with the front page framed and stuff, and I brought it home to my mum. The first thing my mum said is, "That's not going up on the fucking wall."
And rightly so.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, and to this day, when someone asks her, when they're talking about me or whatever, obviously it's all she talks about. He did have no. It was just about something in town, nothing to do with prostitutes, Eastern European prostitutes.
I get.
But that was
Rick. We usually by the end of the show we ask our guests some quick fire questions. One of them involves what do you have when you have a tipple. But there was an article by January about you doing dry January, and you had a lot of interesting thoughts about alcohol being a gateway drug for you. Yeah. Has your opinion changed much in the past 10 months?
No, I wish I drank less than I do. I don't drink a lot, and there are periods of time where I go through. I've had, like say it's Thursday, I've had 1 can of beer this week. But that's kind of because I'm going through a whole, I need to get in some way slightly fit in the run up to Christmas. For me, it's as much of a weight thing as it is of anything else.
Beer weight.
Beer is a real issue.
Colin could tell us. Colin, the Fresher Stone. You've heard of the Fresher Stone?
Fresher Stone.
Yeah. You took that to a Fresher 2 Stone.
I was 13 stone at the end of first semester, and then since over the course of the summer, I'm now 11.
Yeah, because it does, and it happens.
And it is the beer weight. Oh, you don't. And you can. And the thing is, thankfully, I managed to lose it fairly sharpish.
You do the metabolism of, let's face it,
I'm still only 19, so...
You have a teenage metabolism. God, that's even worse.
Yeah.
God, I wish I had a teenage metabolism again. Jesus.
Yeah, so thankfully, as much as I put it on, I was able to quickly cut it away. But yeah, beer weight is a thing.
I think my problem is that before I discovered craft beer, I never really liked the taste of beer. Let's face it, Heineken tastes terrible.
Yeah, Heineken's best.
And you know, every at Carlsberg, I don't like Guinness. I
Guinness.
All those beers didn't do anything for me, and then I found IPAs in my world, and I went, aha, I like the look of you.
What's your choice?
I've loads. I can give you a cast of millions. Are you wearing Delirium Treatment's t-shirt?
No, this is actually our t-shirt for our
so appropriate.
Sober Soft Society.
Because weirdly, a pink elephant is the Delirium Treatment's logo, the Belgian beer makers.
That's like 6 or 7%.
They make a load of them. Their main one is allegedly the world's best beer, and it's actually pretty good. I have a bottle of it at home.
I don't like it. I worked at the bar. I worked in a Russian bar in New York for a while, and we sold that, and everyone that came in, it was really high percent. I think it was like 8% or something, and everyone was like, give some of that.
You have to be careful of your percentages when you're doing stuff like that. Thankfully, most certainly Irish craft beer providers these days are doing session ales, which are about 4% or in and around there, which is great. I've just moved back into Dublin again. We bought a house in Dublin, and unfortunately a craft beer brewery has opened up within a 3-minute walk from my house, and they've opened a tap room as well, and a pizza joint as well, very close.
Even new local,
so that's worrying, and a worrying development for me, and a good news development for them. So yeah. But in terms of the whole not drinking thing, I went through a year on stage where I didn't, when I think when my ex was pregnant with my son or my daughter, well, one of them, I went through a whole year where I just, in sympathy, I just went, not going to drink, that's fine, no big deal. Now, like everybody, I find it harder. You get to a point where you go, it's been a long day, I'm going home, I'm just going to open the beer. I'd like to be European. I would love to be one of those people who comes home, who has, a glass of wine with dinner and goes, that's absolutely fine, we're done now. And most of the time I am, and I think in the last year I've gotten much better at it. At finding where the break point is, because for everybody your problem is always you'd love to be able to have 2 pints or 3 pints and go, I'm really squiffy now, and stop. And the problem is you have problems doing that when you reach that point. But I think I'm getting better at it, and I'm getting much better at it than I used to be, unless I'm drinking cocktails, and then it gets messy.
I think that can be the same said for...
I think we can all relate to that one.
So we've talked about book as an interest, but like you said at the start of the show, you're a Liverpool fan, so there's obviously a bit of sport in there. Was sport a big part of your life, or has it always been a big part of your life?
Sort of. My dad was a major Offaly fan when I was a kid, so I used to get dragged to Offaly. Offaly were half decent in hurling and football.
They would have been in the 80s.
In the 80s, in the early 80s, they were winning All Irelands, so at least we had something to care about, which was quite nice. We weren't allowed to support Dublin, obviously, despite the fact that I was born in Dublin, grew up in Dublin, and lived in Dublin all my life. And so, I got over that was fine. Liverpool were like the glam team of the early 80s when I was getting involved in football. So, it's different for people here. You usually end up picking a team that look brilliant and are doing amazing things, at the time, as opposed to, if you grow up in the UK, it's a geographical thing, it's about where you come from. So I'm a lifelong Liverpool fan. I am proud to say that my name and the name of my 2 sons are both on a paving stone outside the new main stadium at Anfield, and I've only ever been about 4 times or so, I think, but I've a season ticket to the Ireland matches. I'm not going to be in the Epilepsy Stadium watching the Northern Ireland match tonight because I'm working. I have to drive to Kilkenny right now, which is
if your season ticket is going for
my son has them, and he's already bringing one of his mates. Hugely that. I never developed an obsession with rugby. I've been to a couple of rugby internationals. It's nice.
I kind of just pay attention when the big matches are rolling around, let's say this weekend. But again, because I work weekends and here during the week, I don't really watch a whole lot of rugby.
I don't care about golf or Formula One, or there's a lot of things that I don't.
Myself and Greg are deputy and head of sport respectively for DCUFM, but golf is...
That's not a real thing.
I think we'll end with golf.
And
any advice, Rick, that you've gotten?
Not golf advice.
Not golf advice.
Watch your backswing, and in terms of what?
Either the best advice you've been given, or something you can pass on for people trying to make it in any industry.
Basically, what would you tell us?
Tell us,
as inspiring.
Also our listeners.
I think I have two pieces of advice for you. One of which is for you as people, and one of which is for maybe you if you're trying to do it in this business. For you as people, it's weird because you're around the same age as my son. My son's 20 now, and we have a great relationship. He's in college. He's living with mates. And we meet at least once a week, and we go and have breakfast, or we go and have lunch, or we go and have dinner somewhere. For his birthday every year, I don't buy him a present, we just go somewhere. So he picks a city and I go, come on, we're going away for a weekend, and we'll go somewhere and do that. I think part of that is appreciate the realms of possibility that you have now. You guys are all of an age where literally you can do anything. You can do absolutely anything with your lives. The older you get, the more that narrows. And once you get into your once you've decided on a career maybe, and then you get into your kind of mid-20s and late 20s, and then you get into your early 30s and your mid-30s, and things narrow and narrow and narrow until you get to a point where, this is what you do. You do this thing. Some people break out of that, fair enough, but most people don't. So the realm of possibility is limitless, and don't underestimate that. And in terms of working and doing jobs in radio, it's a terrible idea. Oh my God, radio's not going to exist by the time you guys are my age. Are you kidding me? Radio's an awful idea. Run while you can. Seriously. Radio will survive in one form or another. Whether radio survives in the form it exists now in even 10 years' time, I don't know. Whether it will be far more, everything, media consumption is going to be on demand. That's both television and radio. So it's both video, audio, and everything else. So it's why podcasts are becoming so enormous, because people don't want to have to be at a certain time in a certain place to listen to a certain thing. They want to listen to it when they want to. And I'm one of those people. And the same with on-demand TV as well. I don't even know if traditional TV channels are going to exist in 10 or 15 years, or whether everything is going to be based on a Netflix-style model. I don't know. I've read a really good book this year by Yuval Noah Harari. He was the guy who wrote *Sapiens*, and his book this year, I think, is called 21 Questions for the 21st Century. And one of them, he deals with work. He deals with everything from climate change to education to the rise of AI to politics of work and all of this. And he talks about work, and he said for people who are growing up now, you need to be prepared to have maybe 3, 4, 5 careers in your life, that you're probably not going to end up doing one thing for the rest of your life. So that's it. Be prepared.
That's as an appropriate ending as any. Rick, thanks very much for making the trip to Shannon Square.
This is a new studio.
I'm glad I inaugurated your studio for you.
Yeah, exactly. Our first guest, we'll put a plaque up.
All of our fan mail can now be directed to apartment 33, block A5 of Shannon Square.
Exactly.
Just be prepared for the queues outside for the people.
Exactly. I think there's some forming already.
People must think Mickey Burns here.
Yeah, they could be here early.
An audience with you guys, and
exactly. I've seen.
We can make a bit of money. That's how we pay for the Zoom. We'll charge them for tea and coffee.
Exactly. Brilliant.
The plan is coming together nicely. Rick, thanks very much for
my absolute pleasure.
And it's been a pleasure talking to you. This has been In Conversation with Rick O'Shea, with myself, Colin, and my co-host Gavin and Greg. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Good luck.